They scheduled a family photo shoot, then asked her to iron the clothes they'd wear without her. Joan Hadley, mother, grandmother, and sole owner of the house they posed in, didn't argue. She steamed the pastel linen, smoothed every sleeve, watched them laugh under her cedar tree. By Monday, the deed was gone. The house sold. Quietly. Her son and daughter-in-law never saw it coming, and when they asked where their home went, the paperwork had already answered, "We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from." It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence. It lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The morning light stretched long and pale through the kitchen window, catching the corner of the fridge like a spotlight exposing something it wasn't supposed to. Joan reached for the cream, then paused. A printed memo fluttered slightly beneath a Garfield magnet. Family photos Saturday at 2 p.m. Dress warm tones. Hair makeup by 12:30. Names listed underneath in bold Sharpie. Derek, Erica, Lila. No Joan. No mom. No grandma. She stared at it for a full minute, reading it twice, then a third time, like maybe she'd find herself written in the margins, if she just looked long enough. From the hallway, Erica's heels clacked like punctuation. She swept into the laundry room holding a basket, nails done in a glossy nude, hair twisted into a loose updo that always seemed just seconds from falling. She dumped a neat pile of garments, pastels, creams, wrinkle-prone linen, onto the folding table. "Would you mind pressing these?" she said, not looking up. "You're so much better with steam than I am." Joan blinked. "Am I in the photos?" Erica hesitated, rifling through the basket. "This isn't really your generation's vibe. It's more curated, clean, modern lines. Just nuclear family. You know." Joan nodded slowly, the kind of nod one gives when the answer's already been decided without you. "I see." Erica smiled briefly, already half out the door. "Thanks, Joan. You're a lifesaver." The sound of her phone pinging down the hall followed her. Laughter in the distance, an echo of group chat notifications. Joan was never added to. Joan stood in the quiet. The pile of clothes looked like they'd been chosen from a catalog titled Togetherness, just not too much. She walked to the corner, plugged in the iron, and waited for the hiss of readiness. The room was still but thick with something, grief or memory. It was hard to tell. She smoothed out the first shirt, a soft champagne blouse she vaguely remembered Erica wearing to brunch once. With each press the fabric gave way, creased, then clean, then folded with exactness. She didn't cry, not exactly, but her eyes did well, just enough that when Lila stepped into the doorway 20 minutes later, she didn't have to ask anything. Joan didn't turn around, she didn't stop pressing, but she knew Lila was watching. Lila leaned quietly against the frame. "Want me to do the last one?" Joan shook her head. "I've got it." Lila stepped closer. "They should have asked you to be in them." Joan smiled faintly, a line she couldn't quite keep still. "They did, in a way." "How?" "They asked me to iron the image of myself out of it." Lila's jaw clenched. She picked up a hanger and gently slipped the finished blouse onto it. "You looked better in that color anyway." The iron hissed softly. The pile shrank. Outside, Erica's laugh rang across the deck. Derek's voice followed, light, almost boyish. "Let's get one with just the three of us." Joan turned off the iron. She set it upright, unplugged it slowly, then laid the cord across the table like a ribbon you only use once. One hand steadied the final fold. The other reached for a post-it from the nearby drawer. She wrote one word. "Done." Lila took it silently and stuck it to the front of the last hanger. Down the hallway, the house buzzed with planning. Camera angles, outfit swaps. Erica adjusting her lipstick in the hall mirror. Joan stepped into her own room, shut the door and sat at the edge of her bed. From outside, the unmistakable sound of a camera shutter. Inside, silence like a thread pulled tight and ready to snap. The cafe was nearly empty, save for a young couple whispering over lattes in the corner, and a barista humming along to some indie playlist. No one recognized. Joan sat at a window booth, her coat still buttoned, hands folded neatly around a ceramic mug of Earl Grey that had long gone cold. She hadn't touched it. Will Novak slid into the opposite seat and set down a leather folder with the kind of practiced ease that said he'd been doing this longer than most marriages lasted. "You look well," he offered. Joan gave a tight smile. "I look finished." Will flipped open the folder. "You brought the deed?" She handed him a slim envelope. Original copy. Never digitized. He pulled the paper out carefully, smoothing it across the table. There it was, in typewritten ink and embossed seal, sole owner, Joan Hadley. Will's brow lifted. "Still in your name alone. Not bad for a woman who's had 2 decades of tenants and no co-signers." "They were never tenants," Joan said. Her voice held no anger, just the clean edge of truth. "Tenants pay rent, contribute, they carry weight." She paused. "Derek hasn't paid a single utility bill since 2011. Erica says things like, 'You don't charge family.' They act like this house was left unlocked by God just for them." Will nodded. "So you want a clean transfer? Quiet?" "Is clean as bleach," she said. "And I don't want it to go to them. Not ever." Will tapped his pen twice. "I can structure it as a private sale, off-market, quiet filing. The buyer gets ownership, and you lease back until your chosen exit." Joan's eyes narrowed slightly. "Would I still have control until then?" "Completely." He smiled, soft and steady. "You're the key holder. They're just noise in the hallway." She exhaled once, deep and measured, then, "Start the draft." Will made a note on the corner of a yellow legal pad. "Any preferences for the buyer?" "I've already met with her," Joan said. "Tamara Ruiz. She's local. Doesn't flinch when I use phrases like quiet title or survivorship clause." Will chuckled. "You really did remember everything from when Ed was working estates." "Some things you don't forget," Joan said. "Especially not when people assume you're just background furniture." The bell above the door jingled as someone walked in, dragging snow off their boots. Joan didn't turn. Will slipped the folder back into his briefcase and slid a blank signature sheet across the table. "We'll file the initial paperwork by Monday. Once the trust transfer starts, there's no undo button." Joan reached into her purse and pulled out a ballpoint pen, the kind banks give away. She clicked it once. "I know." She signed with a steady hand. No hesitation, no flourish. As she dotted the final I, the cafe's music changed. An old Etta James tune, humming softly over the speakers. Joan looked up, the corners of her mouth curving into something real for the first time all morning. "I never danced in that house," she said. "Not once." Will tilted his head. "Would you like to?" She shook her head. "I'd rather walk out with posture." Will tucked the documents away. "Then we'll make sure the door opens the way you want it to close." Joan stood, coat still buttoned, mug still full. As they walked toward the door, Will turned to her. "You've got 10 days before the first mailer goes out. Want me to notify them early?" Joan's lips barely moved, but the words carried weight. "No," she said. "Let them plan their next group photo. I'll be out of frame, and one step ahead." The morning of the photo shoot arrived bright and windless. Perfect light, no excuses. From her upstairs bedroom window, Joan could see Erica pacing the backyard, phone in hand, coordinating last-minute details like it was a small wedding. The photographer had already arrived, camera swinging from his shoulder, scouting angles near the cedar tree. Joan and her late husband had planted their first summer in Boulder. Now it was just a prop, background filler, a place to lean and pretend affection. Joan stayed in her room. She sat at her sewing desk, not to stitch, but to sign. The final documents Will had couriered over rested neatly in a blue folder. She signed page after page, steady, quiet. One line asked for reason for private sale. She wrote, "Estate restructuring." No one knocked. No one asked where she was. Below, laughter erupted. "Everyone stand closer." The photographer called. Joan stood just enough to peek through the lace curtain. Erica wore a dusty rose maxi dress with a ribbon at her waist like she was auditioning for Grace. Derek stood stiff in a button-down she hadn't seen him iron. Lila was at the edge of the frame, smiling politely, her body turned slightly away. Erica's voice floated up. At least the background looks clean. Derek added, it's easier when she's not in the frame. Joan let the curtain fall. She didn't flinch. She just reached for the final page. Click. Signature. Date. Downstairs, the door creaked open, then the sound of soft footsteps, hesitant ones, a knock. Grandma? Joan turned. Lila entered, holding a small plate with a corner piece of cake, chocolate with vanilla buttercream. A plastic fork was tucked underneath. Leftovers, Lila said. From the after photos celebration, I guess. Joan smiled gently. You looked beautiful today. Lila sat on the edge of the bed, legs swinging slightly. It wasn't the same without you. Joan nodded, setting the pen down. That's what makes some absences louder than noise. Lila looked at the papers on the desk. Is that the... Joan gave the smallest nod. It's done. A breeze stirred the curtains. The house had grown oddly still, like it sensed the shift in its own fate. Lila's voice was quiet. They don't get it, you know, what they've done. Joan looked toward the window but didn't respond. Instead, she reached over and gently tucked a stray hair behind Lila's ear. They don't have to understand, she said. They'll feel it soon enough. The hallway echoed with the sound of chairs being scooted, silverware clinking. Erica's laugh rose again, sharp, staged. Lila stood. Want me to stay up here with you? No, Joan said. Go be seen. It's not your weight to carry. Lila hesitated, then leaned down and hugged her grandmother tight, arms around her shoulders like a brace. Save me a real photo someday, Lila asked. Joan smiled. I already did. After she left, Joan walked back to the desk and picked up her phone. She opened her text messages and sent a photo to Will. The signed documents, time-stamped, a small blue sticky note in the corner that read, "No turning back." He responded almost instantly, "Received. Consider it done." Joan set the phone down and finally picked up the cake. She took one bite, then another. Outside, the family posed again, laughing, rearranging, turning their faces toward the camera. Inside, Joan stood tall and walked to her closet. She opened it and began pulling down boxes, labeled and ready. Joan stepped outside just past 7 a.m., long before the house had begun to stir. The grass was still heavy with dew, and the edges of the cedar tree cast shadows like fingerprints across the backyard. She moved slowly, deliberately, one hand trailing the wood of the old deck railing, as if it might speak back to her. She didn't bring a notebook. She didn't need one. She'd memorized every creak in the boards, every knot in the fence. This wasn't a farewell walk. It was a boundary check. By the time she reached the edge of the garden, where the hydrangeas struggled for light beneath the overgrown lilac, her phone buzzed. Tamara Ruiz. Draft listing delayed, per your request. Nothing posts till you say so. Joan texted back. Hold for 14 days. Offer rental terms to buyer, not to current occupants. She slipped the phone back into her pocket and turned, facing the house. It looked peaceful from this angle, calm. But Joan had learned that dysfunction often hid in good angles. It posed well, framed well, cropped better. Inside, she began packing a row of old hardcovers from her office shelves, tax law, estate logistics, poetry from a time before she became a footnote in her own home. Lila knocked once and stepped into the doorway, barefoot and half awake. You're up early. Joan didn't look up. Habit. Lila crossed the room, picked up one of the older books, leather-bound, fraying at the edges. Why are you packing your old stuff already? Joan paused, with her hand on a box lid. Because I'm not staying where I'm not seen. Lila looked down at the book in her hand. They don't know what they're losing. They never took the time to ask, Joan said, taping the lid shut. Later that day, Erica stood in the dining room, laptop open, surrounded by a half-drunk matcha latte and a list of hashtags scribbled in pink ink. She clicked post. The family photos went live. Muted golden tones, backlit laughter, staged intimacy beside the cedar tree. In one shot, Derek lifted Lila mid-laugh. In another, Erica reached for his shoulder, fingers caught mid-motion. The likes came quickly, comments even quicker. You guys look like a magazine. This is giving goals. Where's Grandma? Hope she's well. But Joan wasn't in a single frame. Not blurred in the background. Not captured accidentally. Not even reflected in the glass of the sliding door. She had been scrubbed clean, like a stain someone was proud to remove. That evening, Lila found Joan at the dining table, sorting warranties into neat piles. They posted the photos, she said. Joan didn't ask to see them. Didn't flinch. Were you in any? Lila shook her head. They didn't even tag me. Joan smiled faintly, paper in hand. Even shadows get left behind when the lighting's staged. At that moment, a new message from Tamara pinged Joan's phone. Tamara Ruiz, we're clear on title, lease back clause approved, buyers interested, final walkthrough pending. Joan typed back one line, schedule the walkthrough, they can have the house. I'm keeping my exit. She locked her phone and placed it on the counter, next to the stack of folders labeled utilities, access codes, and warranties. From the living room, Erica called out, does anyone know where the spare charger is? The photographer just messaged, he wants to use one of our photos in his portfolio. Lila looked toward her grandmother. Joan looked up, serene as stone. I hope he chooses the one where they all looked their happiest, she said softly, because that's the last one they'll take in this house. The paper was heavy, thicker than standard printer stock, with just enough texture to remind you that decisions carried weight. Will laid the draft on the kitchen table, smoothing the corners with the back of his hand. This language is final, he said. Once they receive it, they'll have 10 days, no extensions, no misunderstandings. Joan adjusted her reading glasses, not to read, she'd already memorized every word, but to look at it one last time with the calm of someone who wasn't bluffing. I want them to feel it, she said. Not just read it, feel it. Will nodded, flipping to the second page. You'll serve them once escrow closes. Official delivery window opens 14 days from today. I'll notify the county. From the hallway, Lila's footsteps padded softly. Socks on hardwood, a rhythm Joan could identify without looking. Hey, Lila said, entering with her usual quiet presence. Found something in the closet I don't think I was supposed to. She held out a small, dusty frame. Inside, a faded photo. Joan in her 30s, standing in the same backyard, sun in her eyes, arms around a younger Derek who was mid-laugh. Taped to the back a yellowed index card with Joan's handwriting. If no one ever thanks you for building the home, at least leave knowing you did. Lila blinked quickly. Was this for me? Joan took the frame gently, thumb resting on the corner. Not originally, but maybe it was waiting for you to find it. Lila sat across from her. They're not going to take this well. Joan didn't look up. It's not your weight to carry. Lila's eyes brimmed, but she didn't let anything spill. None of this is my fault. Joan reached across the table, took her granddaughter's hand and pressed it firmly. None of this, she said, is your fault. The oven beeped behind them, Erica's casserole reheating for guests Joan hadn't invited. From the front window, voices echoed, cars parked in the driveway. Laughter trailed up the porch like smoke. Will glanced toward the door. Company. Joan stood slowly, walked to the drawer by the entryway, and pulled out a thin folder labeled Key Transfer plus Access Docs. Then another, Garage plus Utilities. Then another, Warranty Reference. Each one was tabbed, labeled, and color-coded like a final project submitted by someone who never missed a deadline. They're hosting a brunch tomorrow, Joan said. Their idea claimed the house feels like it finally belongs to them. Will raised an eyebrow. So while they host, I close, Joan said. At that moment her phone buzzed. Tamara Ruiz, closing confirmed. Title transfer in 13 days. Buyer accepts lease clause. Welcome to the finish line. Joan typed back without hesitation. Confirm document notarization. Schedule delivery of notice for day 14, noon sharp. In the living room, Derek called out, Mom, do we have the folding chairs in the garage? Erica wants to set up stations. Stations. In Joan's house. She didn't answer, just slipped the folders into a canvas tote and zipped it shut. Lila watched, breath held. What happens if they fight it? They won't, Joan said. They'll bluster. Then crumble. Lila's eyes narrowed slightly. You're sure? Joan finally smiled. A real one. Cold, clean. They've spent 10 years treating this house like a favor, she said. It's about to become a lesson. She looked back to Will. Courier the final version to Tamara. I'll hand-deliver theirs. He stood, collected the files, and nodded with quiet admiration. You've already won, Joan. This, he tapped the envelope, is just the paperwork. As he left, Joan walked to the guest room closet. She reached behind a row of coats and pulled out one last item, an envelope labeled, their copy, already stamped and sealed. Lila stepped into the doorway. What's in it? Joan didn't answer. She placed the envelope gently on her nightstand, turned off the lamp, and whispered to the dark. They scheduled brunch. I scheduled the exit. By mid-morning, the house smelled of citrus-scented disinfectant and supermarket florals, the kind meant to suggest effort without history. Joan stood at the top of the stairs, watching Erica adjust napkin folds and fluff throw pillows with the air of someone staging an open house rather than hosting family. The dining room table had been extended, extra leaves added, white runners centered. A small chalkboard sign stood by the coffee carafe. Welcome home brunch, Hadley style. Joan didn't step down. She'd already learned how to become furniture. Erica turned to Derek as she positioned the mimosa pitcher. Can you believe how far this place has come? She said. It finally feels like home now. Derek, still in his slippers, laughed and pointed toward the sunlit corner by the bay window. That's where I'm setting up my work-from-home desk. I'll need better Wi-Fi in that wing. Joan moved quietly down the back hall and into the basement, where real things still lived: photo albums, heirloom quilts, a chipped cradle that had held 3 generations. She found Lila already in the storage room, wrapping crystal bowls in dish towels. Started without me? Joan asked. Lila looked up. Figured I'd give the fake brunch a real purpose. Joan pulled a box labeled family linens off the shelf, top drawer of the guest dresser. Nothing fragile goes in the attic. They'll forget the attic exists by next spring. Lila nodded. Got it. Upstairs, voices rose in fake excitement. Guests arriving. Erica performing. A cousin laughed too loudly near the entryway. Joan and Lila worked quietly, packing pieces that weren't replaceable, weren't noticed, the real parts of a house. The weight, not the shine. As they carried the second load up the stairs, Joan's phone buzzed in her apron pocket. She stopped, one hand still on the rail. Tamara Ruiz, final papers in hand. Waiting on your go for notarized drop. Joan typed back. Tomorrow, noon. Leave no gaps. She slid the phone away without breaking stride. By late morning, the kitchen was a carousel of glassware and sugary drinks. Erica floated from guest to guest like she was auditioning for the role of woman who earned this. No one noticed that the living room bookshelf was missing half its usual contents. Joan finally stepped into the hallway, dress pressed, hair pinned, not for them, but for herself. She walked once through the party, past the laughter, the staged smiles, the family friend who greeted her like a footnote. She smiled back, wordlessly, a portrait of peace so tight it was practically armor. Near the coffee table, Erica gestured to a neighbor. We really love it here. It just fits our rhythm, you know? Joan passed behind her, slow and measured. At the stairwell, Lila met her with a box labeled glass. Don't stack. She raised an eyebrow. Want help sneaking this to the car? No need, Joan said. They won't notice what's missing until it's too late to retrieve. Derek called from the den, holding up a tablet. Babe, can we ask Mom about switching the router location? Might need an Ethernet drop in that room. Joan didn't stop walking. In the hallway, she reached the drawer beneath the guest book, the one they never opened. She placed a sealed envelope inside, to current occupants. RE ownership transfer and residency terms. It waited quietly beneath the blank pages, where visitors used to write thank you for your warmth. Joan turned and re-entered the party, nodding once to Will, who had arrived silently and stood at the threshold with a to-go cup and knowing glance. They look happy, he murmured. They should, Joan said. It's the last time this house will lie to them. As the brunch hit its peak, glasses clinking, small talk flowing, Joan stepped into the backyard alone, her heels barely marking the deck. Behind her the house buzzed like a hive. Ahead of her, only clarity. The next morning broke golden and quiet, the kind of stillness Boulder only gave up after a night's worth of snowfall. The deck held a thin coat of frost. Sunlight came in slow, refracting through the kitchen window like it had to ask permission. Joan stood at the stove in her softest sweater, a hand towel slung over one shoulder. The scent of rosemary chicken and garlic roasted potatoes filled the house, aromatic, familiar, and calculated. She stirred the green beans gently, listening to the soft tick of the oven and the faint creak of the upstairs hallway. This would be her last meal for them. They just didn't know it. By 6 p.m., the dining table was set, mismatched placemats, polished silverware, the good water glasses Erica never remembered they owned. Derek came down first, sniffing the air like a dog returning to a known trail. Erica followed, holding her phone, thumbs still tapping, as she slid into her chair. Lila came last, giving Joan a subtle nod before sitting. "Wow," Derek said. "You didn't have to go all out, Mom." Joan smiled, laying a folded napkin beside his plate. "Hobbit," Erica speared a green bean. "Everything smells amazing. Can we start?" "Of course," Joan said. They began eating, voices casual, forks scraping ceramic. Erica told a story about a co-worker's promotion. Derek added a joke about Zoom etiquette. Lila barely touched her food. Halfway through, Joan stood slowly. "I'm going to step away for a moment. Don't toss on my account." No one asked why. She walked the long hallway to her room, feet soft against the rug. Once inside, she closed the door, sat at her desk, and opened her laptop. The document folder blinked on the desktop. Final ownership transfer, Ruiz buyer, leaseback, contingency, county filing PDF. Joan clicked it open. Each field had been checked, each page reviewed 3 times. The closing forms, the digital signature receipt, the updated title, it was all there. She took one deep breath, then another, then clicked upload. The browser confirmed the file was sent. She opened her email next, to Tamara Ruiz, Will Novak. Subject, final submission, body, attached. All signatures complete, proceed per schedule. She hovered over the mousepad for a second, not out of doubt, but precision. Then she hit send. The browser refreshed. The message vanished into cyberspace, and with it, so did the last shred of ownership she'd allowed to be weaponized against her. Joan closed the lid. She picked up her phone and typed one sentence to Lila. "Tonight, sleep in peace. We start fresh soon." Down the hall, someone laughed at something on their phone. Joan stood, stretched her arms like someone setting down a heavy coat, and looked around the room. It no longer felt like hers. It felt completed. Back at the dining table, Lila felt her phone buzz. She glanced down, read the message, and exhaled. "What's that?" Erica asked, mid-bite. "Homework reminder," Lila lied. Joan reappeared just as Derek reached for seconds. "You all right?" he asked, through a mouthful. "Perfect," Joan said. "Everything's right on time." No one noticed her hands were cleaner than they'd ever been. Joan started early, before the sun had properly risen, before anyone else had padded down the hallway in socks or slippers. The house was quiet, but no longer hers, and that made every cupboard door and drawer handle feel like an old friend she was preparing to leave behind. She moved with purpose. From the hallway closet, she retrieved a pack of neon orange dot stickers and a black Sharpie. Drawer by drawer, she peeled and pressed, numbering each one like a technician tagging evidence. 1 silverware, 2 plate, 3 baking sheets, 4 pantry upper left. By the time the coffee began to brew in the kitchen, the lower cabinets were labeled 9 through 13. The fridge bore a small sticker at the top right corner. 17. She stood back and admired the quiet order of it all. Not just a farewell, but a system, a reset clock. Behind her, Erica entered, wrapped in her fleece robe and scrolling her phone. She froze at the sight. "Why are there stickers all over the pantry?" she asked, setting her mug down too hard. Joan didn't flinch. "Inventory helps the next phase." Erica squinted. "What phase?" Joan peeled off another sticker. 18. The part where everything gets returned to its rightful place. Erica frowned but said nothing. She wandered out, brow furrowed, clearly assuming Joan had just gotten organizational. But Derek was less easily soothed. By midday he stood in the den with his laptop open, frowning as he clicked through page after page of login screens. "That's weird," he muttered. "The Excel account just logged me out." He tried again. Passwords not working. Joan passed by with a labeled envelope in hand. "That's because your access has expired." He looked up sharply. "What?" She turned slightly, gave a polite smile. "Ownership systems run on access. No ownership, no access." Derek stared at her. "Did you change something?" "I reset what was already broken." He opened his mouth again, but his phone buzzed. He glanced down, then paled slightly. "Why is the Wi-Fi name different?" Joan didn't answer. Upstairs, she returned to her desk just as her phone pinged. "Will Novak. All accounts finalized. Notice letters scheduled for County Post tomorrow. Let me know if you want them hand-delivered instead." Joan responded with 3 words. "Let them arrive quietly." From downstairs, the fridge opened and slammed again. Erica's voice rose. "Derek, did you move the oat milk?" Joan smiled faintly and pressed sticker 29 onto the side of a small drawer near the back hallway. "Gift wrap and tape." Lila emerged from her room, hoodie sleeves pushed past her wrists. She paused, eyes on the sea of numbered drawers and cabinets now glowing like breadcrumbs in fluorescent amber. "This looks official," she said. "It is. Should I be worried?" Joan pressed one more sticker onto a drawer, then looked at her granddaughter. "No," she said. "You should be calm. Everyone else can panic." Lila nodded once. "I like your kind of chaos." In the living room, Derek's voice cut through the air, tight and urgent. "Joan, what's going on with the utility accounts?" "My name's not on anything." "No," Joan said calmly. "It never was." She returned to her room, opened her laptop and double-checked the county submission log. All files showed as received. Status, processing, estimated delivery 24 hours. Her cursor hovered for a moment over the confirmation. Then her eyes flicked to the small desk clock beside her. 10:11 a.m. 1 day left. She took the final inventory envelope from her drawer. Contents, labels, passwords, lock codes, account pins, and sealed it. On the front, she wrote, "To the next owner, not the current tenants." She placed it on her nightstand and sat beside it, sipping the rest of her lukewarm tea. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and persistent. A blanket over everything no one noticed was shifting. The envelope came in the morning mail, dropped through the slot with the rest of the day's ordinary. A few catalogs, a bill, a flyer for window replacement, and one thick manila packet with the Hadley address typed in crisp black ink. No return label. Just finality. Erica plucked it off the floor, flipping it with vague curiosity as she stirred her latte. She opened it lazily, half distracted by her phone. She didn't stay distracted long. The first words stopped her. Notice of final ownership transfer. Notice to vacate. 10 days. Her mug tilted just enough for foam to slosh over the rim. She read it twice, then a third time. "Derek." Her voice cracked across the house like a slap. He stumbled in, barefoot, rubbing his eyes. "What?" She shoved the letter at him. "She sold it. Joan, your mother, sold the house." Derek blinked at the packet, confusion slipping into panic. This isn't real." "It's notarized," Erica hissed. "It's county stamped. It's realer than anything we've ever signed." Joan entered from the hallway, calm and composed, in the same cardigan she'd worn the day her husband's will was finalized. She looked rested, at peace. Erica turned on her like a blade. "You sold our house without even telling us." Joan tilted her head. "It was never your house." Derek stepped forward, voice louder than necessary. "You didn't even give us a chance to make an offer." To talk about it. Joan's gaze didn't waver. You told me I didn't belong in the picture, she said softly. I believed you. Erica was shaking. This is illegal. You can't evict your own family. From behind Joan, Will appeared in the doorway, document folder in hand. You'll find everything's legal and binding, he said, voice crisp. Transfer was executed with full authority. You have 10 days. Derek looked like he'd been slapped. You planned this, behind our backs. No, Joan corrected. I planned it in plain sight. You just weren't looking. Erica flipped furiously through the packet. What about Lila? You didn't think about what this does to her. I did, Joan said. More than either of you ever have. Lila peered at the stairwell. She wasn't hiding anymore. I want to go with her, she said. Silence hit the room like snowfall. Too soft to scream, too loud to ignore. Erica spun. Excuse me? I said I want to stay with Grandma. Lila repeated. I don't want to be part of this version of our family anymore. Derek's face broke hurt, confused, unmoored. Lila, this is your home. She looked down. Then why have I never felt safe saying anything here? Joan stepped beside her and placed a hand on Lila's back. You always had a room with me, she said quietly, just not in this house. Will passed Erica a final sheet. This outlines the lease back clause for the new owner. You're not included. That wasn't an oversight. Erica looked ready to scream, but instead she sat abruptly, like the weight of it had buckled her knees. Derek dropped the packet on the table, his voice small now. Where are we even supposed to go? Joan didn't answer. That wasn't her burden anymore. She walked past them, into the kitchen, and poured herself a cup of tea. Lila followed. Together they sat at the breakfast nook, the only two people in the house who had made peace with the change. From the foyer the doorbell rang. Joan didn't move. Will glanced at his watch. That would be the courier. He's dropping off the buyer's key. Erica's voice cracked through the air. She planned this like a war. Joan stirred her tea, calm and precise. No, she said. A war leaves casualties. This was a lesson. You chose not to study. Why noon? The silence had gone dense. Not peaceful, just heavy. The kind that lingers after something irreversible lands in the middle of a house, and no one knows where to look. Derek stood in the garage doorway, staring at a box labeled Tax Docs 0915 like it might answer for something. He hadn't said much since the letter, but now, alone in the sound of his own heartbeat, he was starting to understand. This wasn't a bluff. Joan passed behind him, with a pair of folded moving blankets over her arm. You don't have to pack anything for us, Derek said without turning. I'm not, she replied. These are for my things, the ones I brought into this house, the ones I plan to take out. In the living room, Erica was pacing, barefoot and furious. She hadn't brushed her hair, and her mascara smudged at the corner. Every call she'd made that morning, lawyer friends, Facebook groups, even a cousin in real estate, ended with the same words. If the house wasn't in your name, you have no legal claim. You can't just leave us here, she snapped as Joan came back through the foyer. You're abandoning your family. Joan didn't even blink. You erased me. I'm just following your outline. Erica's jaw clenched. This is still my daughter's home, which is why she's coming with me. Lila entered then, quietly holding an open box containing Joan's vintage linen bundles and a half-finished embroidery hoop. Grandma, do you want the sewing kit in its own bin? Yes, Joan said. Use the one with the green handle. It's already labeled. Lila nodded and crossed the room. Her eyes careful to avoid her mother's. Derek reappeared in the hallway with a collapsed cardboard box in hand. I'm only packing what's mine, he said defensively. No one's stopping you, Joan said. But don't mistake momentum for agreement. He hesitated at that, like he didn't know whether to thank her or resent her for the clarity. From outside, a truck engine idled. The moving company had arrived exactly at 2 p.m. Just as Joan had scheduled, two uniformed men stepped up the walkway, glancing at the home with the quiet curiosity of people who move lives for a living. Joan met them at the door. Only the items marked in blue tape, she said. They'll all be in the basement, guest room and sewing closet. Nothing from the kitchen or main living areas. Understood, one of them said. You've got it sorted real clean. I always do. Upstairs, Lila gently closed the lid on a box of lace trims and thimbles. Do you want to take your frame too? She asked. Joan looked at the wall. The frame held an old cross-stitched quote, "Home is where they welcome you back." She walked to it, unhooked the nail and turned it face down before placing it into the final box. No, she said. I think I'm done bringing that hope with me. Downstairs, Erica had sunk into the couch, still scrolling through her phone, texting people with growing desperation. Every message sounded the same. Can she do this? There must be a loophole. We've lived here for years, but even her phone seemed slower now, like the house itself had pulled away, severing the power behind all of it. Just before sunset, Will arrived in a dark overcoat, carrying a small manila envelope. Your address change is filed, he told Joan. USPS, banks, tax records. You're officially in transition. Joan nodded. It feels like shedding. He handed her the envelope. Final confirmations are inside. You'll start seeing the reroutes within the week. As he stepped out, he passed Derek, who was now holding a framed family photo in his hands, like it might shatter from inside. Will didn't stop. Just offered a quiet, best you start deciding what's actually yours. The new apartment smelled like freshly painted baseboards and possibility. The ceilings were low, the walls a soft oat color, and the kitchen cabinets clicked closed with a satisfying hush. It was no house on a hill, no multi-level colonial, but it was enough. It was her. Joan stepped through the threshold with a canvas tote over one arm, and the weighted stillness of someone who'd just removed a nameplate from a life. The place was modest. 2 bedrooms, wide doorways, no stairs, a porch with just 3 steps and a rail that didn't wobble. Outside, wind chimes hung from a neighbor's window, catching a gentle breeze. Tamara Ruiz met her at the door, clipboard in one hand, keys in the other. Final walkthrough complete. Mailbox is number 6. Utilities are switched. Everything's in your name now. Joan took the keys with both hands, like they might dissolve if held carelessly. Thank you, Tamara smiled. You landed on your feet, Joan. Most people just wait until the walls rot around them. I've been waiting long enough, Joan replied. It was time to move toward the door. Inside, she unpacked slowly. Not because she was tired, but because there was finally no rush. The plates went into their new cabinets. The sewing kit found a drawer beneath the kitchen window. On the small shelf by the pantry, Joan placed one photo, the only one she'd brought from the old house. It was her and Edward, sitting on the old porch steps, coffee mugs in hand, her legs tucked under her robe, his hair still dark at the temples. The light caught them mid-laugh, back when they didn't need to schedule joy. She looked at it now and let herself smile. Still laughing, she whispered. The phone buzzed on the counter. Lila, they're freaking out, but I'm okay. I told them I was staying one more night. Then I'm yours. Joan responded without punctuation. Doors unlocked. Come when it feels right. She didn't ask what was happening back at the house. Didn't need to. Panic sounded the same in every zip code. Later, as the sun dipped low and the first scent of someone else's dinner drifted through the vent, Joan poured herself a cup of mint tea and stepped out onto her new porch. 3 steps. A chair. A quiet. The silence was clean this time. No undercurrent, no withheld resentment. Her voicemail pinged. She looked at the screen. One new message from Erica. Joan sat. Listen. Erica's voice was ragged, fragile in a way Joan recognized not as grief, but as realization. The sound of someone who finally understood what permanence meant. Mom, I don't know what to say. I know you're probably not going to call me back, but I didn't think you'd actually do it. I didn't think you'd walk away from us like this. I mean, I know we weren't perfect, but you're my mother. There was silence, then a soft, choking sob. I just wish you'd told me sooner how much you hated us. Joan tapped delete without hesitation. She walked inside, refilled her tea, and looked around the apartment. No voices echoed down the hallway. No doors slammed. No footsteps stomped over her boundaries. She pulled a folded dishcloth from the drawer, and began wiping down the already clean counter. Not because it needed it, but because old habits feel softer in new spaces. The door buzzed once. Joan opened it slowly. Lila stood there, a backpack slung over one shoulder, hair still damp from a rushed shower, and eyes that looked relieved for the first time in weeks. Joan stepped aside. Rooms on the left. Lila walked in and stopped. "It smells like you in here," she said. "But not old you. Present you." Joan locked the door behind them, then nodded toward the kettle. "Still warm." Lila set her bag down, pulled her sweatshirt sleeves past her knuckles, and said, "Can we just sit for a bit?" "We can do anything," Joan said. "No one here has to earn quiet." Outside, the wind shifted. The first leaf of fall tumbled across the sidewalk, crisp and curled. Inside, Joan poured 2 cups, one for the girl who still chose her, one for the woman who finally chose herself. Rain had been threatening all afternoon, thick clouds crowding the sky like regret. By the time Joan heard the knock, soft and uncertain, the first drops had begun to pattern her new window pane. She didn't rush to answer it. From the kitchen she could see the silhouette beyond the glass. A man slouched, hands in his pockets, the hood of his sweatshirt pulled up like it might soften whatever was about to be said. Joan opened the door. Derek stood there, wet around the edges, looking smaller than he had in years. He had no umbrella, no plan, and barely met her eyes. "I didn't think you'd actually do it," he said. She didn't step aside. He shifted, trying to find footing in a space no longer his. I thought it was just a warning. I didn't think you'd go through with it." Joan said nothing. Instead, she walked to a shelf and pulled down a navy blue binder. She opened it slowly at the table, flipping through tabbed sections with practiced hands. "Missed property tax notices," she said. "Utilities in my name. Unpaid. Calls I logged. Emails I sent." Here's the quote where Erica said, "I was part of the vintage aesthetic, not the vibe." She turned a page. "Here's the legal summary Will prepared for me. Your rights, my responsibilities. How many of those did either of you ask about?" Derek's face set. "You didn't have to cut us out completely." Joan handed him a photo, one of the edited family shots, printed from Erica's public post. "This is the one you liked best, right? Clean lines, warm tones, no clutter." She tapped the corner. "No mother, no grandmother, no woman who paid the mortgage while you played grown-up." He stared at the image like it might rearrange itself in his hands. "That house raised you," Joan said, her voice low and even. "And you buried me in it." Outside, thunder rolled, a low rumble that passed without hurry. Derek tried once more. "We can fix this. Maybe if you can't fix what you refuse to see." She took the photo back, slid it inside the binder and closed it gently. "Do you want to come in?" she asked, not out of hospitality but as Derek looked past her at the small living room, the tidy corners, the photo of Joan and Edward on the shelf. "No," he said. "It doesn't feel like mine. It never was." For a moment, he stayed rooted. Then something inside him folded, quiet and slow. He nodded once and turned. Joan watched him walk down the steps and out into the rain, the back of his sweatshirt darkening with each drop. When he reached the sidewalk, she closed the door and turned the deadbolt once. Then again, the echo of the lock filled the apartment like punctuation. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just stood there for a moment, hand on the knob, breathing in the scent of chamomile and rain-washed concrete. Then she walked to the table, opened the binder again, and pulled out the photo. She folded it in half, creased down the middle, and tossed it into the recycling bin. Some memories didn't need frames. They just needed endings. The flyer came on thick paper, folded neatly into thirds. No gloss, no color, just words, simple and direct. Staging for exit. Confidential consulting for homeowners in transition. By appointment only. Discretion guaranteed. Joan set the sample down beside her tea, letting the words rest between them. Tamara had left it that morning, along with a bouquet of early lilacs and a note. "Clients are asking for someone like you. Ready?" She was, in ways she hadn't expected. Her new apartment had begun to carry her shape now. Routines lived in it. The sewing kit sat beneath the window again, this time used not for mending linens, but for designing something new. Across the table, Lila sketched quietly on her tablet, thumb brushing across the edge of a minimalist design. A door cracked open slightly, a thread of light winding through. Beneath it, a name in clean serif, silent exit. Joan watched her draw. That the final version? Lila nodded. It's subtle. The kind of logo you don't realize you've remembered until you see it again. Joan smiled faintly. Exactly what I need. She sipped her tea and turned back to her notepad. The checklist was growing. Staging plans, trust coordination referral, leaseback options, consulting, secure disposal contacts. What had once felt like her own desperate escape was now something she could offer others, quiet paths for quiet women who were tired of screaming into rooms that never listened. That afternoon, Will dropped by with an envelope and a grin. It's done, he said, placing the documents on the table. Trust finalized, transfer complete. All assets now sit under LH Revocable Trust. No contest, no gaps. Joan slid the folder open and nodded at the first page. You made it seamless. You made it earned, Will replied. This kind of clarity doesn't come from money. It comes from truth. Most people can't hold it that long. Joan didn't look up, just tapped her pen once and turned the page. I held it for decades. He watched her as she flipped to the back of the file, where a copy of her updated will rested. Lila's name was there, sole inheritor. No conditions, no trap. Will raised an eyebrow. You sure she's ready for this kind of legacy? Joan smiled. She already carries it. I'm just confirming the load. Later, when the apartment had gone quiet again, Joan opened her desk drawer and pulled out a small note card. She wrote in steady, deliberate script, "For the one who saw me clearly, before I remembered how." She folded it once, sealed it in an envelope, and tucked it into a shoebox, labeled only. Later, Lila entered from the hallway, rubbing her arms through her sweatshirt. Just emailed you the logo files. Want me to set up a Gmail? Joan looked at her for a long beat. This girl who had become her co-conspirator in clarity. Yes, she said. And a calendar. Start with 1 slot per week. No weekends. Lila grinned. You're becoming a legend. Joan raised an eyebrow. Quietly. Outside, the wind had begun to shift. The last blush of fall was lifting from the trees, leaving behind branches that didn't mourn their shedding. Joan opened the window a few inches and let the breeze in. In the other room, her old quilt was already draped over the back of Lila's chair. The corners had worn soft like the women who'd made it, piece by piece without praise. Joan walked over to her filing cabinet, pulled out a fresh folder, and labeled it in clean black ink, "Silent Exit." Clients underneath in finer print. Your dignity doesn't need permission to leave. As she slid the folder into place, her phone buzzed. Tamara, client, book, referral from a neighbor. Late 60s, retired teacher, wants to leave quietly before the kids start calling her confused. You're on? Joan replied. I'm ready. Tell her I already understand. She placed her phone down, turned off the light, and stood in the doorway of her own home. This new, unassuming place that didn't ask her to prove anything. Tomorrow, she'd help someone else find theirs. The iron had sat in the hall closet for weeks. Cold, clean, untouched. Joan found it again on a slow Sunday morning while searching for winter gloves. There it was, black handle, silver plate, cord coiled tight like a memory that refused to unravel. She picked it up like it might still hum. It did. Later that afternoon, she stood at the counter in the local craft store, explaining the dimensions to a young man in a beanie who didn't ask why anyone would frame a household appliance. She returned home with a custom shadow box, 12 by 12 inches, matte black. Lila met her at the table, eyebrows raised. You're framing it? Joan nodded, already unscrewing the old iron's handle to fit it snug. Some people mount medals. I mount a moment. She placed a small placard beneath the iron, written in embossed brass, the last thing I was asked to do before I stopped asking. Lila said nothing, just stood beside her, hand resting gently on Joan's shoulder. They mounted it in the hallway, just outside the guest room. The space was too small for guests now, but perfect for truth. Joan stepped back, arms folded. It was never about the object, she said. It was about who they thought I still was. Someone who pressed close, Lila said quietly. Someone who didn't mind disappearing. The snow began mid-afternoon, soft and slow. By dusk the neighborhood sidewalks had softened under white hush. Joan set the kettle on, letting the peppermint steep while the apartment dimmed gently. Then a knock. Not urgent, not casual. The sound of someone who wasn't sure she'd be welcome. Joan opened the door. The woman standing there was older. Mid-60s, coat zipped to the neck, clutching a reusable shopping bag like it might offer answers. "Hi," she said, voice paper thin. "Tamara gave me your address," she said. "You help women figure out how to leave without the whole world watching." Joan stepped aside without hesitation. "Just tea. No photos." The woman smiled, eyes glistening. "That's all I'm hoping for." Inside, Lila gathered her things and headed toward her room with a knowing glance. She paused just long enough to whisper, "Call me when you're ready to brainstorm the next flyer." Joan nodded. The woman sat on the small couch, removing her gloves with slow, shaking fingers. "My son and his wife, they moved in when I got sick. Just for a few months, they said." Joan poured 2 cups, careful not to let the mint leaves crowd too close to the rim. "And now, they redecorated," the woman said. "My wedding photos in a box under the stairs. I found my high school diploma in the bathroom cabinet last week." Joan passed her a cup. "That's how it starts. They move things before they move you." They sipped in silence. Outside, the snow gathered, unfussy and persistent. Joan glanced toward the hallway, toward the iron, now frozen in time and truth. "Do you have a timeline?" she asked. The woman nodded slowly. 3 months before they think I'm too tired to drive. I'd like to leave before they start calling it safety." Joan reached for her notepad. "Then let's begin with the first drawer. Which one's still open for you?" A quiet fell again, thick but not suffocating. The kind of quiet that knew exactly what came before it. Joan wrote 3 words at the top of the page. "Exit, softly planned." Behind them, the hallway held its own kind of gallery. No smiles, no gold frames, just proof that sometimes, the first thing you put behind glass is the one they never thought you'd keep. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, Joan listened, patient and alert, while a new woman told a very old story. The frame arrived in a plain cardboard box, wrapped in tissue paper and tucked between 2 folded sweatshirts for protection. Lila had sent it without ceremony. No note, no emojis, no explanation. Joan didn't need one. She knew what it was before she even pulled the tape from the sides. She recognized the weight of something earned. Inside, the original photo from the family shoot. The one that had never seen Instagram. The one Lila had quietly copied from the photographer's shared folder before Erica began curating the aesthetic. In the image, everyone was mid-laugh. Erica's eyes squinted just enough to be real. Derek's arm was caught mid-gesture. Lila looked young, sure and momentarily unself-conscious. But Joan was in the center. She wasn't posed, she wasn't framed like an afterthought. She was simply there, present, and smiling like someone who hadn't yet decided it was her last favor. Below the photo, mounted inside a matte black border, Lila had added 1 brass plaque. "Presence, not permission, position." Joan exhaled as she read it. Not softly, not sentimentally, just full, like lungs that had finally earned their volume. She hung it in the hallway opposite the shadow box. 2 frames, 1 truth. Later, with a fresh cup of jasmine tea and the last slice of lemon shortbread, she stepped onto the balcony. The mountains behind her apartment were just barely visible through the winter haze, their tips powdered with snow like sifted flour. She wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and settled into the chair, letting the silence settle too. Her phone buzzed once. "Lila, want to help with the next story?" Below it, a photo of an empty flyer template. Same layout, same clean font. No words yet, just a door, cracked slightly open. Joan smiled and typed back. Only if I get to be in the frame. She paused before hitting send. Not to overthink, just to hold the moment, full and alive. Then she tapped the screen. Inside, the apartment was still. The shadow box reflected the hallway light. The family photo, finally framed, caught a soft golden wash from the nearby sconce. Joan would go back inside soon. She'd start a new client folder. She'd write out notes on quiet claim steps and exit mapping. But for now she sat, balanced, solid, unmoved. A gust of wind swept the snow lightly off the railing. She watched it drift downward, no longer part of the roof, no longer trapped where it landed. The sky above the mountains broke just slightly enough to reveal a sliver of pink where the sun wasn't ready to say goodbye. Joan sipped her tea and tilted her head toward it, and smiled. They left me out of the picture, so I printed the contract instead.